Well, I used to laugh because my wife would tell me, you're allowed to get thrown out of one game a year. Just go nuts, do whatever. But most of the time I got my money's worth and did whatever. But this one time we were in Kansas City, and Dan Iassogna, who's still umpiring today, one of the great all-time guys. Like, you talk about salt of the earth, just every time you see him, hey, Dan, how you doing? Super nice. And we were playing against Milwaukee in Kansas City, and it was the first inning, and I was hitting in the bottom of the first, and Sean Markham threw me a cutter about that far in. And, he thought it came back. Dan Iassogna called strike 3. And I didn't even really argue that much, but I drew a line to let him know where it was. And he was like, Frenchie, you drew a line. I have to throw you out. And I'm like, I realized I did. And like, that's an automatic ejection.
Yeah.
And so he tosses me. So I'm like, crap, done after the first inning. So 3 weeks later, we're in Detroit facing Doug Fister. And if you know anything about Doug Fister, massive sinker baller. I mean, runs that much. Well, I walk out on deck, and there's Dan Iassogna behind the plate. Haven't seen him in 3 weeks. It's Friday night, first game. And I walk up to the plate, and Dan honestly, I've not had a lot of umpires do this, was like, Frenchie, you were right. I hosed you. That ball was in. I'm sorry.
Wow.
And so I came back and I felt bad because I like Dan. I'm like, Dan, I didn't mean to show you up and draw a line.
Yeah.
Like, one thing you can say, and that's kind of what you're asking, you could honestly cuss an umpire out all you wanted as long as you look down at the ground. The moment you turn to them to show them up, you're gone. So I'm like, water under the bridge, Dan, let's move on. So Doug Fister, first pitch, throws it, sinker about that far in the plate, and Dan goes, strike. And I turn around and I go, Dan, and he said, as you can imagine, I can't say the word, but he goes, crap, did I do it again? And I mean, dude, Alex Avila was catching. He started dying laughing. He actually had to walk out to the mound to Doug Fister because he was laughing so hard. I was laughing. You know me, like, I smile a lot. Yeah. I had to turn and walk off. And there's a picture of Dan just sitting at home plate, shaking his head like this. And I get a kick out of it because 2 years ago, Dan was in the playoff game, and I think I might have told that story on air. If not, we talked about it during the pregame show. I was talking to Dan about it. It's a great story that we remember. But
that's awesome.
There's one thing I do not, and I'll say this before we get going.
Yeah.
I do not like the automated strike zone. I know a lot of people want it. I know because of gambling purposes it's coming and other stuff. But the human element and the interaction between umpire and a player, still one of my favorite things of all time.
It's so hard now with the box. That's
TV, what I'm saying.
You know?
These guys, because of all the technology. So I know it's coming, but you're going to miss some of the banner.
Cool story.